Well, happy Father's Day to me. And can we give a hand to all the dads who are in the room? Appreciate you, those online. So we're trying to rebrand Father's Day as Dad Joke Day today. And so we know that some of you, especially the kids, but many of you act like you don't love dad jokes and the ability of a father in your life to slip a random joke into any situation. But we know that deep down inside, beneath the eye rolls and the groans, you truly appreciate our cleverness and love our dad jokes. And so, isn't this true? Now, some of you, you're wondering, when does a regular joke become a dad joke? And it's only after it becomes apparent. Get it? Apparent? You saw what I did there? So I thought we would start this Father's Day with me sharing with you some dad jokes I found online. And so here's one. Why are Saturday and Sunday the strongest days? Because they aren't weekdays. I'm getting a lot of love from this side of the room. This side, I need some more participation. All right. Never buy anything made from Velcro. It's a total ripoff. These are good dad jokes. What did one eye say to the other? Between you and me, something smells. Have you ever heard about the roof joke? Never mind, it's over your head. And then lastly, I was wondering why the ball kept getting bigger and bigger, and then it hit me. Well, you're welcome for those dad jokes, and to help you with yours on your way out, thank you. For all the dads in the room, we've got donuts outside. If you didn't grab one yet, grab one on your way out. And there's a little plate that looks like a donut that to carry it on. And on the backside, surprise, there's a dad joke for you. So this one says, question, why are skeletons so calm? Answer, because nothing gets under their skin. Da-dinch. Well, my name is Ken Primeau. I'm one of the pastors here. And I've got 4 children who call me dad. And they absolutely love my dad jokes. I promise you they love all of my dad jokes. But last week, we're in a series right now called 8 to 15, The World is Smaller Than You Think. And over these weeks, we're talking about your relational influence. And last week on Ballapalooza Sunday, I talked about us being willing to do whatever it takes to bring a friend to Jesus. And this morning, I'm starting it off by doing whatever it takes, even sharing bad dad jokes, whatever it takes to bring people to Jesus. The reality is, for most of us who are Christians, which is probably the majority of people in the room because you're here on a Sunday morning, most of us who are Christians, we know the most important thing that we're supposed to do, but we don't do it. And so God tells us the most important thing is the great commandment. Jesus narrowed it down. He said it's really 2 things, but love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself. That's called the Great Commandment. So we're supposed to worship God, love God with all that we are, and then to love other people. And then Jesus explained how we go about doing that is that we join in his mission. And not only do we have the Great Commandment with those 2 laws, but the Great Commission Jesus gave us as followers, which is to go and make disciples of all nations, that we're to join in God's mission to reach and save the lost and reconnect them into a relationship with God so that they can love God with all that they are and to love other people. And so we're called to join in the Great Commission. But then most of us never do it, right? We never want to share our faith with someone else because we're afraid. We don't want us to be uncomfortable. We don't want them to be uncomfortable. We don't know what to do or how to say it. And so we never do whatever it takes to share Jesus with a friend or to bring someone to Jesus. We do nothing at all. But the reality is that if you're a follower of Jesus, God has designed you and he's placed his Holy Spirit inside of you and he's created you to be a world changer, to change your world, the world around you, your sphere of influence, that through the power of the Holy Spirit, what we've seen is over the last 2,000 years, since Jesus sent the Holy Spirit after he resurrected, The primary way that the gospel or the good news of Jesus has spread all over the world has not been just through large gatherings like this or through preachers like me, but rather through individuals, through followers of Jesus who have taken seriously to share their faith with their relational world. It's the original social network. Like before there was social media, God had created, and we're going to use this word oikos, this relational network that you and I have, and the church has spread through those networks all throughout history. And there's a sociology professor at Baylor University who's written some incredible books about the rise of Christianity. And Rodney Stark, he talks about the rapid and remarkable evangelization of the world in the first few centuries of the church. How it spread from 12 disciples to all across the Roman Empire. And here's what he had to say. He says, mostly the church spread as ordinary people accepted it, the gospel, and then shared it, the gospel, with their oikos, with their 8 to 15, with families and friends. And the faith was carried from one community to another in the same way, probably most often by regular travelers such as merchants. You see, I have a friend, Pastor Tom Mercer. He's a mentor of mine and has been for a number of years. And he has, over the last 40 years, really popularized and shared with churches around the world this idea of oikos, or 8 to 15, which is a Greek term. Now, maybe you've only heard of it because of your yogurt, right? You go and you buy yogurt, and it says oikos on it. It's Greek yogurt, but the term oikos, what it means is household or home, or it refers to your own people. The term, it encompasses more than just your physical dwelling, like a house. It includes that, but it also includes the people who live in that home. And in the first century, it wasn't just maybe a mom and dad and 2 siblings or something like that. It wasn't just a family of 4, but oftentimes it would have been a larger family with maybe servants or also foreigners that would have been living on their property. And all of that together would have been their oikos, their sphere of influence, their people. And so depending on the household, it might be 8 people, maybe 12, maybe 15, 20, 25, and that was their oikos. And so I want to show you in our English Bible, because you're not going to see the word oikos, this is Greek, but in our English Bible in Acts 11, Peter was praying and he tells us this, Acts 11 verse 11, right then 3 men who had been sent to me from Caesarea stopped at the oikos, where I was, the house where I, Peter, was staying. The Spirit told Peter to have no hesitation about going with these men. These 6 brothers also went with me, and we entered the man's oikos. He told us how he had seen an angel appear in his oikos and say, send to Joppa for Simon, who is called Peter. He will bring you a message through which you and all your oikos will be saved. Over and over again throughout the New Testament, we see this Greek term oikos, which refers to a household. This 8 to 15, your sphere of influence. And what we see is that as the gospel travels to an individual, it impacts their sphere of influence, their entire oikos, their household. We see this over and over again. We see this where Paul and Silas, they were put in prison in Philippi. And as they're there, they share the gospel, the good news of Jesus, with the jailer who is holding them in prison. And in Acts 16, it says this, verse 31. They replied, believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, you and your oikos. Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all the others in his oikos. At that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and all his oikos were baptized. The jailer brought them into his oikos and set a meal before them, and he was filled with joy because he had come to believe in God. He and his whole oikos. His pan is the Greek term for whole, pan oikos, his entire oikos or sphere of influence. So this idea of oikos is what I want to talk about today. The 8 to 15 people in your life that sit in the front row, that have front row seats in your life. And so you can see that we've got some 4 chairs up here. We're going to come back to this in a moment. But what I want you to do is for a moment to picture an auditorium like this or like a theater. So we've got an image here of a theater. Yeah, we can go back to that. A theater, and to think about you on a stage. Okay, now you don't need to get ego here, but this, you on the stage, and this represents all the people that have access to your life. People who see your life, see how you live, see the way that you speak. Now, in that theater and in your life, there are some people who might be sitting on the balcony, like way in the back of the theater, and they can see you, but it's from afar. And maybe they're Facebook friends, or maybe they're acquaintances that you have, but they're not close up in your life. And then there's other people that are sitting in the mezzanine section. For those of you that don't go to the theater often, that's the middle section, okay? So the mezzanine, they're sitting there, they're a little closer up, but they're still pretty far off. Then there's some people that are in the orchestra pit, in the orchestra area, and they're a lot closer up in your life. They have more access, they have more visibility. But then there's some people who sit in the front row of your life. Maybe for you it's 8 people. 10 people, 12, 15, 20, 25. On average, each of us have 8 to 15 people who are on the front row of your life. And the Greeks called that inner circle your oikos. Now, these are people who can see your flaws. They're close up. So they're people that can see that you got a booger in your nose, right? Like they see your flaws and your shortcomings, and they're probably close enough to you, they'll call it out in front of others, right? You got a booger right there. You're like, can you be quiet about it, right? These are people that have a front row view of your life. And what I want you to see this morning is that the most natural environment for you to share your faith with the world around you is through your 8 to 15, through those in the front row, through those in your oikos. In fact, I want to argue that 95% of Christians, people who have come to faith in Jesus, have primarily come to faith in Jesus because of someone that was in the front row of their life, someone who was in their oikos, who shared their faith with them, and then they became a Christian. That it didn't happen from a TV evangelist or some distant pastor or a crusade or a book. Now maybe someone like me got up on a stage and talked and then led a prayer, and that person, that might have been the moment where they prayed a prayer, but I didn't lead that person to Jesus. It was the person in their life who walked with them and who invested in them and prayed for them and shared life with them. And maybe someone like me or a TV evangelist might have just prayed a prayer, but the primary influencer in their life was someone else who was in their oikos, in their 8 to 15. And so just with a show of hands, I want you in a moment, raise your hand if a family member, first just think about it, family member or a friend or a coworker or a classmate or a neighbor played the primary role in you deciding to follow Jesus. It might have been a parent or grandparent. Raise your hands now if it was someone in your relational influence, that primary role. Look around the room. Hold those hands up. Look around the room. Almost everybody in the room, okay, you guys put your hands down, came to faith through someone in their 8 to 15 who invested in them. 95%. Okay, if 95% of the NBA MVPs came from Fortville, okay, you can bet ESPN would be out here testing the water. Like, what is going on? That so many, like, that's an anomaly. 95% is a statistical anomaly. If 95% of cancer patients who were in remission had the same treatment, that would be all that oncologists would be talking about. 95% is a huge number. And of all the people who have placed their faith in Jesus over the last 2,000 years, I would argue that 95% of them have done so because of the influence of someone in their 8 to 15, in their oikos, in their relational sphere of influence, who made an impact on them, who shared their faith with them. And yet most of us who are Christians aren't aware of this. And so this week, what I want you to realize is that you can make a big impact in your small relational sphere of influence, on your front row, the people on the front row of your life, because you were introduced to Jesus by someone, and now you are designed to do the same for someone else. And the Apostle Paul, he actually explains this, is the way that the gospel always works. That people are not saved without the opportunity to hear. Let's take a look at Romans 10, verse 14. It says this, Paul writes, but how can they call on him, Jesus, to save them? So he's talking about lost people, non-believers. He's saying, how can they call on Jesus to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they've never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them? And how will anyone go and tell them without being sent? This is why the scriptures say, how beautiful are the feet of messengers who bring good news, or the gospel. You see, there are people who don't know Jesus. And Paul is saying, how can they believe in Jesus if they haven't been introduced to Jesus? And how are they going to be introduced to Jesus if someone doesn't go and tell them? And the gospel, the precondition for believing in the gospel is actually hearing it. Now, when we use the word gospel, this is where it begins to get dicey, because now it's like you're asking me to share the gospel with people in my life, and how do I do that? How do I go about doing that? Well, let me just share this. Start talking about Jesus, okay? If you're going to share your faith, start by talking about Jesus. The gospel is the good news of Jesus. Start talking about Jesus. And as God has worked in your life, he is sending you out. You are sent by him to go and share Jesus with someone else, with someone in your 8 to 15, that you're sent to the people in the front row of your life to go and to share Jesus with them. And now here at Mercy Road, we've got a motto that we say, and we put it on t-shirts and on the building and stuff that says, live boldly, love deeply. And we believe that God has called you to live boldly and love deeply in your spheres of influence, in your oikos, in the lives of the people in the front row of your life, that you're called to live boldly and love deeply. And those two phrases mean two things. That to love deeply means that we should be the hands and feet of Jesus. That we should represent Jesus well with our actions. That we should be compassionate and loving and caring for the people around us. That people should look at your life without you saying a word, as they're sitting on the front row of your life, that they're watching and they look at your life and they see you loving people deeply. But we also believe that you should live boldly, and the boldness comes out by actually sharing words, actually using words, because Paul just said, how can they know Jesus if they're just seeing it in your life, but they never actually hear the name of Jesus? And so we model it through how we live and we love deeply, but then also there'll be opportunities and moments where we need to actually share Jesus with other people. And we introduce other people to Jesus, and that's us living boldly using our words. And so to summarize where we've been so far is that you are sent by God. If you're a believer, if you're a Christian, you are sent by God to share the good news of Jesus with the front row of your life, using both your words and your actions. But you might be thinking, well, Pastor Ken, I'm not really a leader type. Like I don't really know how much impact I have on the world around me. Like I'm kind of quiet. I'm more of a behind the scenes type of person. Or maybe you're like, my life is kind of a mess. I'm not sure that like I'm really able to make an impact on the world around me. I'm kind of more a back row kind of guy. Like maybe you're thinking, I'm not really the leader type. Well, let me tell you, we all have a front row of our life. We all have an influence, a sphere of influence of people that we impact, regardless of who you are. You have leadership and influence over other people. And I want to show this in Matthew chapter 9. Verse 9, it says this. You look at the screen. It says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, Jesus told him. And Matthew got up and followed Jesus. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's, here's that term again, OIKOS, his household, many tax collectors And sinners who were in Matthew's oikos, in Matthew's front row, came and ate with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked Jesus' disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Here we see that Matthew, who's this tax collector, Jesus calls him to become a disciple. And Matthew encounters the love of Jesus. Matthew encounters the grace of Jesus in his life. Matthew is introduced to Jesus. Jesus says, "Hi, Matthew, Levi, I want you to come and follow me." And Matthew responds to the good news of Jesus and enters into a relationship with Jesus, and his life is changed. But Matthew's a tax collector. And the Roman government, they had taken possession of all the known world at that time. But they had so much land and so many people that they had conquered that they had to figure out a good way, what's the most efficient way, most effective way that we can collect taxes from all of these people. And so what they would do is in a region, they would allow the highest bidder of someone who was local, the highest bidder to pay them, and it's kind of a franchise model. And then that person would become a tax collector and would collect the taxes from that region and pay the Roman government. And so Matthew, who was this Jewish man, he was the highest bidder and he was selected as a tax collector. And so he's taxing the Jewish people, and they hated him for it. Because the Roman government would say, "We need X amount of dollars from this region." And so Matthew could decide however much he wanted to get from the people, and then he would charge whatever beyond that he could get and extort them, and all the extra profit was for himself. And so tax collectors would get rich by ripping off their brothers and sisters of the Jewish people and then giving it to the empire, the Roman Empire. And so they were viewed as traitors. They were so despised that they had to come up with their own category as sinners, right? If you look at the passage, it said there were tax collectors and sinners. It's like there's sinners who are doing like terrible things, and then that category is not big enough. Tax collectors have their own category of being horrible people, and so there were sinners and tax collectors. Tax collectors were viewed spiritually as impure. They couldn't go in the temple. They were like spiritually unclean animals, and they couldn't give testimony as a witness in a court case. They were despised people. And Matthew was one of these people. And as bad as a man that Matthew was, guess what? He still had a front row. He still had an oikos. He still had 8 to 15 people in his life. They happened to be tax collectors and sinners. And as Matthew encountered the love of Jesus, guess what he does? He throws a party at his house. He invites his oikos, his 8 to 15, his front row to come on over to hang out with Jesus, this man who changed everything. And if Matthew's got a front row, regardless of who you are and how uninfluential you might think you are or how messed up or bad you might think you are, you have a front row. You have an 8 to 15. And when things are going wrong in your life, they're watching to see how you react. And when you have trouble that comes into your life, they're watching to see how you respond. And they're sitting there in the front row of your life, eating popcorn, right? Just watching to see how you live and how you speak. And your life should spark, if you're a follower of Jesus, your life should spark interest in your oikos of what is different about that person. Why do they respond so differently? What's so unique? There's something different about you. Tell me what that is. And then you share your story. You introduce them to Jesus. You tell them what impact Jesus has made in your life. You see, you have a sphere of influence. And today I want to help you identify those people in your life. And so we've got cards, and we've been handing these out each week. I want you to grab one if you don't have one yet. You can also do this on your phone. You can just write it on your phone. We've got cards for the kids. We've handed these out in Mercy Kids, so you can do this as a family. But on the back side, it's got 15 blank spaces. And what I want you to do is to be intentional about writing down the front row of your life, the people that God has placed there. And so I want to help you with that this morning. See, the art of the 8 to 15 list is this, that you're identifying, you're not choosing people. Okay, you're identifying who God has placed in your life. You're not choosing them. You don't get to choose your oikos. You don't get to choose, think about your family. You didn't get to choose all your family members, right? And some of the people that are in the front row of your life, you might not even like them. But you gotta love them. And Jesus has placed you there to make an impact on their lives. And so this isn't some church program that we're pushing. This isn't some evangelistic program or new thing that we're wanting to do. But what we're wanting is for you to have a different lens as you look at the world. And so I'm putting on these glasses here that I found in my kids' toys. It's about putting on a different lens to look at the world differently and go, oh, God's placed that person in my oikos. God's placed that person in my sphere of influence so that I could make an impact on them, so I could love them like Jesus has loved me, so I could share my faith with them as Jesus has shared with me. And as you do that, as you put on that lens, it reminds me of when you get a new car. A few years back, I got a Toyota Highlander, and at the time I thought like, this is, I don't see that many of them around, and then I put on the lens because I bought that car, and then I start seeing them everywhere. You guys notice that? Like you're shopping for a car, and all of a sudden you see them everywhere. I see Toyota Highlanders everywhere, and I thought like, man, I'm not gonna, my wife has a minivan. I'm like, I want a big car. We got 4 kids, but I want like a minivan that's not a minivan, so I bought a Highlander, right? And now as I look around, I see them all over the place, and it's always women driving them and me, so... But you start to see it. And what I want is, as I talk through, we've got 4 chairs up here, and I want to invite the people that are going to help me. If you guys can come in the front row here first, we're going to start bringing people up. But these represent 4 different categories of your front row. And we're talking about this in a moment, but in your front row, there's people watching, they're sitting, and they're looking at your life. And I want you to think about this 2 ways. First, before we get to these 4 chairs, I have a graphic here to think about the different kind of categories of places and people and relationships that you have. And so in the middle there where it says 8 to 15, that's you. And in your life, as you look around your life, there are friends that you have, there are neighbors that you have, there are relatives, there are people from work, people from school, other, I like the other category. Right, we have here on staff on our job descriptions, it's like, here's your responsibility, here's your responsibility, here's your responsibility for all the staff, and then we have other. Miscellaneous duties as assigned, right? Just a catch-all for other, right? And I was out this morning doing some gardening and watering things. They're like, what are you doing out here? Other. It's part of the job description, right? And so we got the other category. Maybe it's someone you play pickleball with, or maybe it's someone on your kid's sports team. So there's this other category, but these are different places and dynamics and relationships where you have 8 to 15 people on the front row of your life. So you can think about it that way. Or another way that I want us to think about is spiritually. That the people on the front row of your life are at different places spiritually. So I'm assuming in your life, not everyone on the front row of your life is far from God. There's going to be some Christians. There's going to be some people who are non-Christian, Christian, at different places in their faith. So I want, for this next moment, for us to think about, and I'm going to give 4 categories, but I don't want you to categorize people and label people. This is not about labeling people or categorizing them. This is about me helping you think about, in your sphere of influence, that there's people at different spiritual places. And as we share this, I want you to think about people in your life who God has called you to make an impact on. And so I picked all dads this morning to come on up for Father's Day. And we're going to start off with pre-Christians. And Kevin, would you come on up here and sit right here? Let's give a hand for Kevin. And so Kevin is someone who represents those who have not yet placed their faith in Jesus. And Kevin thankfully has, and that's why I picked him to sit here so he didn't feel super awkward. But pre-Christians are those who have not yet place their faith in Jesus. Now, with people who are under 8 to 15, they might be far from God, but they're close to you. What I want to encourage you in this is to not lose hope. To keep on having hope for them, to keep on praying for them, that no matter how long it takes, and whether or not they ever become a Christian or not, we're going to love them and have a relationship with them. But we're going to pray. We're going to pray that they will come to faith. And you might say, well, why don't you call them a non-Christian, right? Or why don't you call them someone who's unchurched? Yeah, I use the word pre-Christian. And the reason is because they're not a believer yet. And we're going to pray that they encounter the love of Christ and their life is radically transformed. And so I want to encourage you in that as you write your list of 8 to 15, the longer you've been a Christian, this is what I find, the longer you've been a Christian, that the first draft of your card, probably the less pre-Christians you have on it. And if that's you, one, I want to encourage you to get out of your Christian bubble and to be intentional about the people God's placed in your life. And I guarantee that as you put on the lens of 8 to 15 of OIKOS and begin to look around at your life, you begin to realize, oh, God has placed some people in my life, and I just need to be more intentional in those places. But for me, I work at a church. And so a lot of my relationships are with church people and with Christians. And so we got to get intentional of how can I be intentional with pre-Christians and praying for them, building a relationship with them. And so for me, one thing that I'm intentional about is my kids' sports. I coach my kids' sports teams, hockey and soccer, in order to be able to be in relationship with people that I don't yet know. And then in that, I look around and who God's placed there. And there's some people who are, I call a person of peace that God's placed that we have a connection. And we decide, hey, after the soccer game, why don't we go to lunch together with our families and begin to get to know one another and be intentional in that relationship? Or another way that is with neighbors. Being intentional of, I'm not just going to pull up and get in my garage and close the door, but I'm going to be intentional of going and talking with neighbors and creating a relationship with the community around me that God's placed there. And so the first category is the pre-Christians. Secondly, as we're praying about the people in our 8 to 15 are the prodigals. And I'm going to invite Trace to come on up. Let's give Trace a hand. So prodigals are believers who are not actively pursuing their faith. If you know the story of the prodigal son who's wandered off. And so maybe there are people in your life, in the front row of your life, who maybe grew up in church but have walked away. Maybe they experienced some church hurt. Maybe there are people in your life who have just fallen into the ways of the world and gotten sucked into sin. And I know growing up in the church, sometimes we're like, oh, sinning's not fun, and we lie to people, right? It's like, no, sinning can be fun, okay? If you're sinning and it's not fun, you're doing it wrong. But it can be short-term enjoyment and long-term pain. And maybe there's some people in your life who've just got sucked into the short-term enjoyment of sin, and they've kind of walked away from their faith, and they're prodigals. And they've known Jesus, and maybe even if you talk to them, they're like, yeah, I believe in Jesus, but they're not actively living out and pursuing their faith. And there's people in your life that way that you're called to pray for and encourage and influence. Third category, so we've got pre-Christian, prodigals, and the third category is the purposefuls. Invite Scott to come on up here. Let's give a hand for Scott. So purposefuls are believers who are actively pursuing their faith. These are people who are disciples of Jesus, just like Scott here, sitting here. And so they're watching your life, and they're watching your influence that you have on them. And so you have an impact, and it should be a mutual of discipling one another. And as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And they're watching how you treat people, and you've got this mutual relationship. And so there's people on your list that are actively pursuing Jesus. And that's important. And then we got one more category, potentials. Can you give a hand for Chris as he comes up? And so potentials are those who have been showing up on my life's front row more often than in the past. You see, there are people in your life and you're like, oh, that person's kind of random. And then you encounter them again, you're like, oh, that's random. Isn't that a coincidence, right? And I don't believe it's a coincidence. I think it's a God coincidence. A God is intentionally placing people in your life. And there's people in my life, and sometimes I'll call them, some of you might know this word, some of you might not, but rando, okay? I call people and I'm like, this person's a rando. And I've noticed I say it enough that my kids have picked it up. So my kids were recently on a flight and I was like, how was the flight? And my two boys were like, oh, it was awesome. It was the two of us and a rando lady sitting next to us. Well, there's some randos in your life who seem rando, and then over time you begin to realize, oh, is this a coincidence? Because they're starting to pop up more often in my life than they did before. And you might be thinking like, oh, this person's just my hairdresser. And then because of the conversation today and the Spirit of God stirring up in you, you begin to realize, oh no, this person's not a rando in my life. They're not just my hairdresser, but I've got 30 minutes to be able to share my life with them and to build a relationship with them. And so it's not just about me getting my hair cut. It's about this person God strategically placed in my life, in my OIKOS, in the front row of my life, and to talk with them and to pray for them and to share my faith with them. Oh, I keep running into this person. I saw them at Starbucks, and then I saw them at the grocery store, and they're not just a rando, but God is placing them on the front row of your life. And so from season to season, this list might change because God brings new people into your life, and to begin to notice these potentials who are showing up more often than in the past. And so you've got a front row. We're going to put those glasses down. You've got a front row. You've got a sphere of influence. And as a Christian, you have a mission called the Great Commission. And so I want to invite at this moment for Jesus to come up here. I had him last week at the same service, so we're going to keep it going. Eric, thanks for representing Jesus. He's got a beard, okay? So I needed someone with a beard. And so we've got Eric, who represents Jesus this morning with his awesome beard. And so you have a mission. You've got a front row. You're joining Jesus in his mission. And the mission is to share Jesus with your 8 to 15. And for some people, that's an encouragement of the purposefuls of, hey, Scott, I want to encourage you to spend more time and maybe we could read the Bible together and we could pray together and talk to Jesus. So there's people in your life that's what that looks like. But there's people that should be in your life who we're calling pre-Christian who don't know Jesus. And guess what? God's going to call you to share your faith with them. Now, here's where it gets a little bit squirrely for us because we begin to think, I don't know how to share the good news. I don't know how to share the gospel. And then we teach people in churches like maybe there's 4 steps and you got to use these 4 steps, or there's like the Romans road. And so we start getting it complicated where it's like, here's the formula and here's the exact way that you got to do this. And then we all get afraid because we're like, I only remember 2 of the 4 steps. I'm going to mess it up. I'm going to screw it up. And so I'm not going to even try. So I'm going to make it really simple for you. Guess what? All you have to do is introduce people to Jesus. Now think about, how do you introduce someone you know to someone else that you know? You probably don't have a 4-step formula. You probably don't have some big rubric, right? You just go, hey, Kevin, you're my friend and I know you. Guess what, Kevin? I want to introduce you to another friend that I have. This is Jesus. Jesus, come on over here. Kevin, meet Jesus. And you introduce them, right? And then what do? Maybe you try to find a point of connection, right? So Eric does real estate, and Kevin, you're a lawyer, and hey, do you do any real estate law? You know, you start talking, and you connect them, or hey, Eric's got kids, and you've got kids, and blah, blah. You start asking, where did your kids go to school? And so you just find there's no formula, but relationally, you know how to introduce someone to someone else, and then start finding some points of connection. Guess what? It's the same thing with you sharing your faith with other people. You're introducing Jesus. You're sharing how he's impacted your life, and you're bringing points of connection. See, evangelism is about introducing people to Jesus. And you and I are called to join in that mission. Can we give a big hand as these friends all find their seat? You guys take the chairs with you off to the side. You see, there's many churches in the United States that are shrinking. Now, that's not true globally. Guess what? Globally, the church is exploding in many places around the world, where disciples are making disciples and people are coming to Christ. But in the United States, the church is shrinking, and many churches are wondering, how do we get more people in the front door? How do we reach young people? And let me just say this, that most people who don't go to church because they don't see a compelling reason to go to church. And so churches, we begin to think, well, maybe if we just have a good enough band and enough lights and we give enough donuts away or whatever it is, like if we just have a good enough show and we make it more entertaining, then maybe outsiders will come in and will get saved. And the reality is that people who don't find a compelling reason to come on church aren't going to come because they think, well, it's going to be entertaining. Or it's going to be a good show. Because guess what? You can go to Ruoff and you can watch a better show or a bigger band or a better name. You can go off and you can sin and be entertained in a lot of different ways. And we think, well, maybe if we could change our music style, or maybe we could make it more entertaining, or maybe we could do more events or give more free things away. And let me just say, we try to do the best that we can in all of those things, but I know that it's not about the show, it's not about me on the stage or this band, that's not gonna compel the people in the front row of your life to come to church. Just think about this, if a local mosque was offering good music and great entertainment and a free event, would you go? Would you feel compelled of I should go to that? No, probably not. Do you want to know what the most compelling reason someone in your front row wants to go to church or explore faith or to put their faith and hope in God? It's you, your life, your testimony, your story, your invitation. You see, your front row, I want you to think about who's on your front row. Who has God placed in your life? These are the people that God wants to work in your life and through your life to point them towards Jesus. And we're going to celebrate right now with a response time of communion. Because this is all a response to God's love for us. That you and I, we need to be reminded of God's grace and his love and his mercy in your life and in mine. And so we're not doing this to try to earn anything. We're not trying to force our way into someone's life, but rather we get in touch with the grace and mercy that God has done in our lives and the love of Jesus and the forgiveness that we've received. And it's out of that grace and love and mercy that compels us to go and share with the front row of our lives. And so if you're here and you have not yet accepted Jesus' grace, this could be the first moment. As you take the cup and you take the bread, which represents Jesus' body broken and his blood shed for the forgiveness of sins, it's an opportunity for you to receive his forgiveness. And if you've already made that commitment, this is a reminder of God's grace for you. And as you get in touch with his love and grace for you, there's a call for us to join in his mission, to share that love with the front row of our lives. And so as we celebrate communion, I want to encourage you, if you have not yet, you can do it on your phone, you can do it on one of these cards. Begin to write down 8, 10, 12, 15, 20, 25 names, whatever it might be, of people in your life, and to begin to commit to pray for. And on here it says, list them down, pray for them, invest in them, and invite them. And so we're going to celebrate now with this time of communion. Jesus, I pray. Lord, I pray for your presence here. God, I pray for your grace and your mercy to be a reminder right now as we celebrate communion, that we would be reminded of your love for us. And Jesus, I pray that as we experience once again your grace, your mercy, God, that we are flawed, that we are sinners, God, that you know us better than anyone else. You sit on the front row of our lives, God, and yet you love us and accept us and redeem us and have saved us. And so, Jesus, I pray that from that place we would be sent, that we would go and we would live boldly and love deeply in our spheres of influence, in our OIKOS. God, and I pray that we would help point others towards Jesus. We pray this in Jesus' mighty name. And all God's family said, amen.